Welcome to Black History Matters 2022, presented by the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum, also known as NAHOF, located in Peterborough, New York. Black History Matters is an educational series that seeks to highlight historical events in the Black American experience. This series consists of 28 videos that NAHOF will release daily through the month of February 2022. Videos are viewable on NAHOF's website. The mission of the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum is to honor anti-slavery abolitionists, their work to end slavery and the legacy of the struggle, and strive to complete the second and ongoing abolition, the moral conviction to end racism. This program was funded in part by Humanities New York, with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Betty Brown Bibbins. Dr. Bibbins grew up in Portsmouth, Virginia, where she would participate in the desegregation of Virginia schools in the 1960s by being the first African American to attend Cradock Jr. High School. She received her Bachelor's of Arts from Connecticut College, her Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from Hampton University, and her MD from Eastern Virginia Medical School. Dr. Bibbins is currently retired, but worked as a physician executive educator, an administrator of physician documentation, and a clinical documentation improvement consultant. She was also the founder, CEO, and executive physician educator of DocuComp LLC Healthcare, which provides physician documentation education and continuing education. And she was also the founder of DocuComp Document Institute, a clinical documentation specialist, physician documentation, and physician advisor professional training and certification program. Dr. Bibbins also founded and served as the Dean of Faculty of DocuED LLC, the first nationally recognized program that provided clinical documentation specialist education and certification for hospital clinical staff and supporting personnel. She has also authored several books, including Inpatient Documentation Tips for Physicians and Essentials of Observation, numerous articles and publications such as JustCoding.com, Journal of Healthcare Compliance, and Healthcare Compliance Association magazine. Dr. Bibbins has also participated in numerous presentations and webinars and continues to build upon her extraordinary life as an activist. We welcome her to our series and would like to thank her for her time. Additionally, we would like to thank the organization Desegregation of Virginia Education, a project created to identify, locate, catalog, and encourage the preservation of records that document Virginia's school desegregation process, grades K through 12, and higher education institutions from the 1940s to 1980s, whose link you can find in our video description. And I'd also like to thank Ann Jimerson, Dove's state co-chair, for putting us in contact with Dr. Bibbins. Without further ado, I welcome you to our presentation.
Thank you for having me. I grew up in Portsmouth, Virginia, which is a small town just across the river from Norfolk and Virginia Beach, Virginia. And it is a small bedroom community. The major industry when I was growing up was the U.S. Navy. We have the naval shipyard there, and a majority of the people from my community worked at the shipyard. And so every day, like at 5 o'clock, literally thousands of men would be walking out of the shipyard home. And because we were like 2 blocks from the shipyard, and everyone walked to work in the morning, and at 5 o'clock, thousands literally poured out of the gates to come home in the evening. And so it was, and it still is, a beautiful community with a true sense of community. And it's grown somewhat, but it is very landlocked. So we're one of the smaller communities in the southeastern part of Virginia, known as Tidewater, Virginia. And I would not say anything extra descriptive, except that was the major component of it. And have been known for being like a Tidewater community and a beautiful place to come and just relax. Uh, Over the years that I've had a chance to to appreciate my parents, I'm seeing, and after comparing backgrounds and experiences with others, I feel very lucky to have come from a very different background, being that my mother was born and raised in Portsmouth, Virginia, which is the South. And her parents had come from Georgia and migrated up to the Portsmouth area. And my maternal grandparents, especially my grandfather, was a carpenter, and he evolved a contracting company and helped build homes for Black people in the community. Portsmouth was a very, my part of Portsmouth, my home part of Portsmouth was, as many areas of the South were, was segregated. We lived in a Black community. We shopped in a Black community. We had contact with very few people who were not of color. And that was the routine, and that was, it was nothing exceptional except that was life. And so one of the challenges, though, was that my mother had the chance and went to Virginia State College, was a home economics major. And that's where she met my father, who was born and raised from New Brunswick, New Jersey. So where he lived was a totally integrated, his background was totally integrated. And when he came to Virginia, that was the first time he had had significant exposure to segregation. And so from the beginning, my father understood the differences in way of life. But in Virginia State, you lived on campus, you did everything on campus. And so the segregated life was the lifestyle. There was nothing to do but be on campus. He was an athlete, and I assume that he got a scholarship simply because he came from a very large family that had also migrated from Georgia, but came to New Jersey instead of another part of the South. And he had like 11 brothers and sisters. And everyone in his family worked for Johnson and Johnson. That was the big thing in New Brunswick, New Jersey. All I knew is everyone in my father's family worked for Johnson and Johnson, and they all lived around the perimetry of Johnson and Johnson industries. And so men worked, women worked, children worked, everybody worked for Johnson and Johnson. And so even though I haven't understood it, but I do believe my father got a scholarship because he was an athlete. And this I didn't learn until uh, when I was in my 30s, when I received an invitation from the New Brunswick High School to receive a posthumous award for like outstanding athlete and scholar at New Brunswick High School. And that's the first time in my life that it really hit me that my father grew up in an integrated environment. Because when I went to the meeting or the dinner to accept it, because they were starting like a hall of fame for graduates of New Brunswick High School, it was predominantly white. And it shocked me that my father had truly come from that environment, because he never talked about it. When we went up to New Jersey as a child, it was just a different environment, but everything was normal. I just went from one form of normal to another form of normal. So both forms of normal were normal for me. No big deal was made of it when I went back to Virginia that we were in segregated area. No big deal was made of it when we went to New Jersey that we were in an integrated area. It was just two forms of reality. And this is the way life was. And going back and forth was just going back and forth. And so, but my father was very athletic. And from what I gathered, in those days, athletes just didn't play one sport, they played all year round. So he played baseball, he played basketball, he played football, he did track. And so he was at Virginia State, and knowing that his family had minimal to no resources and that everybody worked, I assume it was scholarship that got him to Virginia State. And there he excelled in track. And so it was very interesting. He met my mother because for track majors, well, let's say for phys ed majors, he there was not a heavy duty academic load. So home economics was considered a course that phys ed majors took because there was not a heavy duty academic pressure placed on them. So that's how he met my mother, because she was a home ec major and he took home ec classes, and they met. And so the two cultures became enmeshed, and they married eventually. And then my father, uh, before he finished Virginia State, went off to World War II. He became a medic while in the Army, and that started him thinking versus being a home ec teacher. I mean, not home ec, but a phys ed major teacher that he had planned on. He decided his interest was piqued in medicine. And so he then ended up going to Howard Dental School after coming back from World War II, spending a couple of years there, finishing up Virginia State, and then going to Howard University Dental School. And then they both settled because my mother wanted to be close to family, settled in Portsmouth, Virginia, which the more I grew up, the more I saw was very frustrating to my father, who came from a totally integrated environment to be totally in a totally segregated environment. And so working with civil rights was not an option. That was the way, because he knew how life not could be, but was. And it wasn't right the way it was in Virginia. And so it wasn't this is something we have to do for the future, but this is something we have to do for now. And this is just a part of life. Working for civil rights was never considered anything other than what we were meant to do. And it was just like, we're having a meeting about voting rights this evening. Betty Lou, you stay in the kitchen. I enjoyed eating, shall we say, and I love being around food. So put me in the kitchen and my day was set. And so I would be in the kitchen, I would be hearing them talking about different plans, on going places, of just going into segregated areas and just sitting, going into the segregated public library to try to check out a book. Um, when the first, once we uh, got, once we were allowed voting, how to do a single shot vote. My parents were very active in the community. Dr. Jim Holly was the first Black councilman in the city of Portsmouth. And what Dr. Holly did was it was elected by everyone in the city. And my parents were going around saying, we don't vote for everybody plus Dr. Holly. We just vote for Jim Holly so that he would have enough votes and others wouldn't have the Black vote, along with all the other votes that would put Dr. Holly at the bottom, knowing no one else but Black would vote for him. So I learned about single shot voting and how we have to work within the system, but how we can change the system. And it wasn't the um, that we have to fight the system, but the whole mindset of my father and all of his friends are, we're going to work within the system. We're going to change the system because the system is wrong, because this is not how it should be and how it isn't. And that it's almost like we were living in an artificial world simply because where my father had come from, it was not, this is something we need to strive for, but this is something we are. And let's just get it back on track and get it on track where it needs to be. And my mother was very, very positive and aggressive in that way. And so the way I grew up is that civil rights was life. And it was a juncture to put to a derailed environment back on track. And it wasn't something that I considered something that I would have to, quote, put my life on the line for, but it just had to do it because it could be done. I've lived in both worlds, and it can be done, and it is being done, and it just needed some tweaking. And I've almost grown up after looking back on things, being able to compartmentalize life, that, okay, this is not the way it's supposed to be. This is what I need to do. And so things don't always have to bleed across everything, but I can focus in one area, even if it's completely opposite of another area, and it doesn't bother me. I do what I need to do, and then I worry about other things at other times. But when I see that I something that I personally feel I need to do, and this makes me proud that I have become what I consider, I'll say I'll consider it, but others have called me more so an advocate and an activist. But I just consider it doing what I need to do. Oh, this is something I need to do. Let me get it done. And even if it may or may not be against something I have done or haven't done in the past, when I see something that needs to be done that I don't feel is right, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Just do it and do whatever you can and change the system. Not out to destroy the system, but the system is flawed and we just got to make it better. We just got to fix it. And even when things have been very, shall we say, there's been major resistance, I didn't take it as a negative. I took it as, now how can I think my way over, under, around, or if need through something to get it done. And so that is how I see any challenges, is that as a challenge. How can I figure my way through this to get to where it needs to be? And how long will it take to get there? Whatever amount of time it takes is how I get there. And so that mindset helped me to go through a lot of experiences that I went through, that when I think back, it bothers me today, but it didn't bother me at the time. Um, Example, because of both my parents' belief in civil rights and my father having lived it, my mother hadn't ever really lived it until she was exposed to my father, and he took her up to New Jersey, and that opened her eyes to the light of the world and how things not could be, but are, and how we needed to get it in places like Portsmouth, Virginia. After I was born, uh, when it was time to start school, my parents wanted me to go to kindergarten. And needless to say, there were no kindergartens in Portsmouth, Virginia for Black youth, for Black children. The education for Black children, separate but equal, yeah, right, was non-existent. Education, kids were graduating from high school without knowing how to read. That was the quality of care. So my parents said, no, this is not going to happen to our child. And I ended up going to the only school that had even a kindergarten around were the Catholic schools. And there was one Catholic school that my parents sent me to in Norfolk, Virginia, across the river. And I think the name is Sacred Heart, but I'm not sure. That was integrated. It was one of the few kindergartens back, we're talking the 1950s, one of the few kindergartens around, and it was in Norfolk, and it actually accepted, I'm not going to say it was integrated, but when my parents looked into it, it accepted Black children. And so myself and two of my cousins, one the first year, and then I don't, and then one after that. So myself and my one cousin and then another cousin went to that preschool kindergarten, and it was integrated. And I don't remember anything being different other than, I was a Baptist. My hardest challenge was working in a Catholic environment with the nuns. It was kind of, who are these interesting, different people wearing these funny habits, these funny hats? It's like the flying nun. And that got my attention more so than anything else, being one of the few Blacks in a quote integrated classroom in the kindergarten. And so my parents went out of their way to travel at that time an hour each way to make sure I got 2 or 3 hours of kindergarten way back when. And it's intriguing because when it was, I went to a Catholic school in Portsmouth. It was all Black, it was segregated, but they were the only schools that actually educated Blacks. And fortunately, my parents were financially able to pay for my education. And so yes, I grew up in segregated South, but I had nuns who were my teacher. Um, they were all white nuns. I think I remember one temporary black nun, which really caught me off guard also. That was another exposure. I said nuns were different people, but they were all white except one. And that one just kind of comes in and out of my mind. So I don't think she was there except maybe as a substitute for a while. And that in itself was very intriguing to me. But when it was time for me to go to integrate, and I didn't know what I was doing at that time, because the whole discussion that my mother had, because at that time mothers talk to daughters, fathers talk to sons, I was in daughters, so my mother was my main discusser, educator, communicator. You're going to be going to a new school, because I went to Catholic school through the sixth grade, first through sixth grade, kindergarten in Norfolk. uh, the first grade through sixth grade was Our Lady of Victory Catholic school, which is now the YMCA in Portsmouth. And so, but when it was time to go to middle school, my mother said, you're going to be going to a new school and it's going to be different. And I went, okay. And she said, but we're going to be okay. That was my total introduction to going into integrated, desegregating the middle school in Portsmouth, Virginia in 1963. And the first day there, my parents took me, and the area is Cradock. Um, we lived about a mile south of, well, really north of Cradock in Portsmouth, Virginia. And the area we lived in was Brighton, and that was all black, and Cradock was white, all white. And so we didn't go in that area much, other than one of the grocery stores was there. So we went intermittently into the grocery store in that area, but didn't ever go there that much. The first day, uh, when we drove up to the school, people were throwing newspapers and cans and stuff at our car. So they were aware that the school was going to be integrated. And police were there and escorted me and my parents to the classroom. And I was just kind of looking around saying, what's going on? There was never a discussion. My parents took me in. They introduced themselves to the teacher. They said, you have a good day and you be safe, Bedaloo. That was my name, Bedaloo. And we'll see you later on. And they treated the environment as this is normal. This is fine. You are okay. We're with you. They gave me a kiss and they left. And for that whole year, after that day, my father would drive me to school with people lining the streets, throwing things at us every day. My father would give me a kiss in the car and say, have a good day, Bedloo. Two policemen would then open the door, escort me to the door of the school as people were trying to get to me, and let me into school. And once I was in the school, I was on my own. No one ever really bothered me. No one got near me. If they saw me coming, they'd go to the other side of the hall or walk away. And I was alone for that whole year. Um, but I have to admit, there are two people that are still in my life now they didn't say anything different. They didn't reject me completely. Two classmates that I still talk to today, that I consider dear friends. And both of them, they just didn't say anything. They didn't stick out like they're gonna, be friends with the colored kid. They were just not as mean as the others. And that's something I picked up. And somebody had kicked me once when we put all our stuff, in closets. And at the end of the day, you get your closet. Somebody had kicked me. And so I turned around, I was just tired of it. And I just turned around and kicked them back. But I ended up kicking David, who is the person who still is my friend today. And I just knew that he was going to go run off and tell the teacher that I would beat him up or something, and that I was going to get in trouble. and it was a nasty kick because I kicked hard. I was angry and I really kicked hard and I thought it was him. And he never said a word. He never said a word. And to the teacher. And he did show me a week later that it was a nasty scar. He didn't say a word. He just pulled his pants leg up or was just above his ankle and just looked at me. He didn't do it angrily. He just showed me that I had hurt him and then just walked away. And but I heard later that when we were going to the high school in the 8th grade the next year that he was going into chorus. I said, I want to, yeah, I want to be with him. I don't know why I want it. So I started joining chorus and been in music a lot more because of him to this day. But anyhow, back at the Cradock at the 7th grade, like I said, wherever I sat, no one would sit anywhere near me. So if I sat, I usually, in the beginning, I would sit in the back of the room, but I'm very nearsighted, so that bothered me. Everybody else would be in the front of the room. So I kind of worked my way to the front room. No matter where I sat, people would always sit, no matter what the seats were, they would always sit on the other side and away. So with time, I just started playing my little mind games. I figured this out as an adult. I wasn't thinking this as a kid. I sat in the front. I sat all the way in the front, which means the rest of the class sat all the way in the back, which fine, but the teacher had to work on the board. So I felt like I was getting a private education because she couldn't leave the board to talk to the back of the class. So I was the only one up there. So to this day, whenever I go somewhere strange, I go either to the front or to the front left or to the front right or to the front middle. And I have learned that my life is dependent upon me, and I'm not that dependent upon what other people think because I grew up significantly by myself for all those years, and that I was especially in school, and I don't care to a degree what others think. But I do have my own standards, my own ethics that I have to keep. And yes, I do listen to others and get my perspective of either it's something that you feel impacts you or something that I feel impacts me. If it doesn't impact me, then why should I do something to make you happy? And so that's one of the things I know I got from my parents is just do what you feel like you need to do and try to do as best you can to be as balanced. It doesn't always have to be right, but balanced and appropriate. And so I keep that in the back of my mind whenever I think of what I feel I need to do, or if something just butts me in the face, which way I go.
Thank you, Dr. Bibbins, for sharing your extraordinary experiences and insights with us. Please note this is only part 1 of our interview with Dr. Bibbins. On February 15th, 2022, we will publish the second part of this interview, in which Dr. Bibbins will speak more about her experiences with desegregation, as well as her experience with higher education. In the meantime, please help us by completing a brief survey available at the link on your screen and also in the video description box. Your feedback will help NAHOF receive funding and help plan future projects. Additionally, please contact NAHOF with any questions and if you're interested in learning more about the organization and its work. Once again, thank you, Dr. Bibbins, for donating your time and contributing to this program. And thank you, the audience, for joining us on this educational journey, Black History Matters. We hope to see you tomorrow for part 2.